You are listening to the Hostage to the Devil podcast. Some listeners may find this content disturbing.
Thank you for reaching out to me. Just remind me how I got onto your radar.
I've always been interested in the paranormal, and after having many years been interested in all sorts of things that are paranormal, so reading about it, watching movies, all that kind of thing since a really young age. I It's been a sort of a journey for me of just unwavering interest, and I've had experiences myself since small over the years, and some have been quite dark. I believe I lived in a haunted house that was quite dark, and through that journey I moved into a different house and I had quite a terrifying experience. And it's really wanting answers. That's really why I contacted you, because I have, since that terrifying experience, wanted to know what happened. And I had read Malachi Martin's books and had watched some of his video footage on YouTube. And then, of course, I came across your work and I started watching your podcasts, listening back to back, really. So I felt that if I was going to be asking anyone to sort of shed some light, you'd probably be one of the best people to ask, just given your knowledge. And the people you also talk to, theologians, parapsychologists, that kind of thing.
It's funny, when the documentary came out on Netflix, I became the sort of go-to man about demons and demonology, and I was like, whoa, I've only been researching this for 6 years. There's people out there been researching this type of topic for 25, 30 years. But it's amazing how suddenly some people think you're like an expert overnight, which I'm definitely not. You're RAF as well, aren't you? You're former military as well, aren't you?
Yes, I was with the Royal Air Force.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
and
obviously
then
we're so used to having to sort of keep an objective level head on things. And I don't believe in coincidences. I believe, people come into your life, projects come into your life for a reason. And I felt like the Hostage to the Devil project fell on my lap. I believe knew I had a certain set of skills and a certain mindset to tackle this massive, massive subject matter. So, no, but let's get straight into your story then. So would it be right in saying that even as a young girl, you felt like you were different, or you had otherworldly sort of abilities? Is that right in saying?
well, I think when I was growing up, in the 70s, I was always interested in some of the programs that used to be on television then. So you had Arthur C. Clarke, his Unexplained, which I found fascinating. My dad used to have delivered every few weeks a paranormal magazine, which used to come in installments. And even at ages of about 7 or 8, I just loved reading about it. And I think that really was probably the start of having not so much an obsession, but a really heavy interest in what's out there. And also because I also went to Sunday school from a young age, I had that kind of spiritual interest. And for me, both subjects really are part and parcel of kind of the same path. So I've found it always very, very interesting. And of course, through the years when I've had experiences, wanting to know why, what does this mean, and listening to other people's experiences. And of course, now with the internet, there's just so much more out there. You don't have to go to a library and get a book. You can literally hear everyone's some of the things they've experienced, and you get a real feel that there's this kind of wider, mysterious dimension out there, whatever you want to call it, heaven, other dimensions, maybe darker, hell, or something in between. The whole subject has always really interested me. But as you say, I think possibly have a sensitivity. I've always had a sensitivity to energies, and I just assumed that everyone had that sensitivity. But over the years, I would say to people, you can feel the energy, and they would look at me blankly. And I realized, actually, as I got older, that's not quite normal. So I would kind of explain it as in the 70s, you would have these cathode TVs where you would have this buzzing ray tube. So if the TV was left on in a room, you knew that it was on because you could actually feel the energy. And that's how I felt an energy, and I still feel the energy. And it's that kind of strange buzz, and it's kind of in my head, the back of my skull. So I've realized over years, actually, I'm probably am quite sensitive, whether you call it spirits, whatever, but I've definitely have something there.
Yeah.
And when I was in my early 20s, I did actually speak to a medium healer, and she actually told me that I had some ability. I've never ever done anything with it, and I can't control it. It's just there. But I
Yeah.
think I definitely have some kind of sensitivity. Yes.
I think with my experience interviewing a lot of a full spectrum of professionals and real people, I think before you can get to the why, I think you need to look at the who, and I think there are a lot of people out there that I don't know how special and how special they are. I mean, in my eyes, everybody is special in a certain degree, but there's only certain individuals who tap into that ability. Would you say, as you were growing older, becoming an adult, did you seem to be attracting, I don't like saying bad people, but pretty much like unhealed people? People come into your life to teach you a lesson. I truly believe that. And
Yes.
also people come into your life to feed off that good energy that you have, that you've harvested that your whole life. Is it right in saying that as you got older, you attracted the wrong type of person? Oh, to be fair, again, I'm going back on myself here. I don't believe in there are no wrong people in your life. There are people who teach you a lesson, and that's pretty much it, really.
Are you talking about sort of being kind of the definition of an empath, where
Yeah,
you
exactly.
kind
Yeah,
of
exactly. I mean,
yes, yeah.
I didn't really understand that until somebody said to me, "You're an empath," and I was like, "Whoa, okay." And then then they explained to me what that was, and I was like, "Oh, wow, okay, that makes sense now." When I was a 7-year-old boy, I realized I knew I was different to everybody else, but I didn't understand, why and what that was until
Yes.
somebody explained this to me. So it was a bit of a revelation to me, and I don't like labeling things and don't like putting labels on things, but it
Yes.
was just that for me it was a lot clearer. And the reason why I'm asking these questions is because before we get into your story, it's
Uh-huh.
important to know who before the why. And from your emails and from the brief story outline you sent through it, I really wanted to get to know you first before we delved into that.
Hmm. I think there's huge amounts of stuff now on the internet about empaths, and people have made careers out of coaching and mentoring and talking about empaths.
Yeah,
Um, and I used to maybe think that I'm drawn to people who maybe have parts that need healing, but I wonder now whether it's actually the other way around, that maybe people who are maybe need to be healed are more drawn towards me rather
yeah,
than maybe it's actually the other way around, maybe more of a light,
yeah,
like a bit of a beacon, maybe.
yeah. Light in the dark. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I don't want to sound like a
No, no,
narcissist,
no. Like
but
you're the only
yes.
hope.
Or maybe I'm just well, I'm sure there's lots of people who are probably a bit of a light, but there may be people who have got that healing, something that needs healing.
Yeah,
Maybe their whatever their energy, because I really believe in energies
yeah,
and
yeah,
auras, and that maybe subconsciously they kind of are drawn to people
yeah,
who are like that because they subconsciously know that maybe there's a chance. But I
yeah.
think people who are really, I don't want to use the word broken, but maybe who,
I use the word unhealed. If it is, it
yeah,
seems,
unhealed,
yeah. I mean,
yes,
it sounds quite sort of.
maybe never be healed though. Some
Some
people,
people, unfortunately, some people
yes,
don't. Some people go to their
yes,
grave and they shift and they move on. They'll definitely be coming back again until they get it right. But there's a lot of
yes,
people in in,
yes.
in this in this in their human form that do not get it, and some people never have that
Hmm.
awakening or have that moment to turn the mirror on themselves. And I think
Absolutely.
it's okay being a healer, but I think the death of the ego has to happen first. I see a lot
Yes.
of healers in the spiritual community, for example, over here in Ireland, who I can read them like a book, and they know that I can read them like a book. So it's a very strange
Yes.
sort of energy where I just feel like there's a lot of like healers, I even hate saying the word shamans and etc. or spiritual leaders who haven't just, there has been no death of the ego first. So the ego takes over, and the rest is history. But no, I think when I read your story, particularly when we talk about it next, about the entity in the room and how it was, even how it was holding you, and you felt like it was like an energy vampire. That this is why I'm sort of like getting to know you first before we delve into that story, because it was a fascinating story. Could you maybe
Absolutely.
talk us through, those big milestone moments and the entity in the room?
So I should say that um, prior to this, I'd gone through a very difficult time for about a decade,
Yeah.
and my energy, my spiritual, mental, physical, everything pretty much was burned out by the time this happened. I had been supporting a parent who had a really horrific terminal disease that had lasted a long time and had become really complex. I'd moved to a beautiful village in Yorkshire, in a really beautiful house. But it became very clear that the house itself had some dark energies, had to get the vicar in at one point. So there was lots of things going on. I'd just had a baby, and my marriage was, it was very clear my marriage was not a good marriage really quite early on. So you can imagine I was pretty, for that decade, I was pretty worn out on every single level. And the house itself, it looks amazing on the outside, probably at least 300 years old, if not more. But the energies within that house were just not good. So it was giving me health problems. Um, and so that's spiritually, by the time I left my marriage 10 years later, I had to move into a different region. And one of the only houses at the time I could afford was a very small Victorian cottage.
Yeah.
And by the time I moved in, I was still grieving for my parent. I was dealing with this divorce, dealing with moving into a completely different region, dealing with a really difficult legal battles on all fronts, and of course trying to deal with just being single again, and financial circumstances are a lot more strained. The house itself was really small, and within a few weeks of moving in, it just felt really cold. My bedroom, I just could never get warmed. And my child started to complain there were figures, shapes on her curtains. And now I'm not saying there weren't any dark or negative energies in that cottage.
Yeah.
But there was definitely something there. You could hear voices. My child used to have a name called Children's Feet Sounds on the wooden floor. But it was all manageable. I wasn't scared because I'd had such horrible experiences in my very old house. And so it was just part of what I'd experienced over the years. So I wasn't that terrified at that point. But by the time I had this experience, I'd been in the cottage probably nearly 6 months.
Yeah.
And as I say, I was on my knees with the stress of everything because I was going through the legal battles and grieving. But ultimately, I was still striving to have peace and happiness and joy. And that's really sort of the outline of the time leading up to this experience. So I do get headaches, and I should say I took medication, but I've taken this medication for years, never ever had any negative experiences with this medication. I had not been feeling well, dropped my child off at school, and I came back to the cottage and thought, right, I really need to try and sleep. And I took my medication, which, as I say, I've took lots of times over years and years, trying to get sleep. I do struggle with trying to sleep with the lights. So I always have blackout blinds in any room I sleep in. So everything in my room was pitch black, I should say that. Very dark. And it was probably about 9:30 in the morning when I finally got to sleep. And that was really the start. I was dreaming, or I thought I was dreaming. My first realization that I may not be dreaming, I had this overwhelming sensation that I was being completely flooded with this huge static energy, the kind of thing you get from a Van de Graaff generator.
Yeah.
And for a few seconds, and so the whole thing probably didn't last more than maybe 10 seconds. My awareness for those few seconds, I was sort of half conscious, unconscious in a sort of dream mode. It's hard to explain, but I was floating in a space. I don't believe I opened my eyes. I was lying on my back and I was just being completely filled with this energy. Now, this energy was overwhelming, and people talk about maybe a spiritual rapture, and I'm assuming this is potentially what they're trying to explain. Certainly nothing I've ever experienced before. And it was as if, as I say, I was being plugged into some sort of atomic machine, being pulsed with an energy very similar to what I've had with the Reiki treatment, but a million times more than a Reiki treatment. And it was as if it was spiritual, mental, physical, and it was overwhelming. And in those moments, as I said to you when I contacted you, even for a few seconds while I was still semi-conscious, my thoughts were, I am this energy is, I am sort of a particles, I am tiny particles. And it was this that I felt, I could almost feel that I wasn't human anymore, as if I was filled with energy of an energy.
Yeah.
And this, so as I say, you were literally thinking of seconds. And as this energy built, because it was so intense, and as I say, it was all encompassing, it was overwhelming, I ended up actually suddenly becoming more awake, more conscious. And I realized within that split second, I was no longer floating. I was still vibrating with this energy, this immense energy. But I found myself in bed and I was actually on the side. So all of this happened very, very split seconds. So 1 minute I was floating, this huge energy. Then I was back on the bed, hadn't moved, but I was in the bed on my side. And I was still had this energy rushing through me. And almost simultaneously, I was terrified to find I was holding on to what felt like a human hand, fingers. And there was this all-encompassing vice-like weight spooning me. And I was absolutely terrified. So my first thought probably was someone's broken in. And then simultaneously, I could hear this voice Now, afterwards, I wrote a message to a Reiki master friend. And I actually said in this message, I didn't know if it was male or female, but I'd forgotten that bit when I wrote to you. I couldn't work out at the time.
Did it feel masculine though, the energy, or did it feel?
Yeah, it did actually. Yes. But the voice kept saying this woman's name over and over and over again with this just, and it was right in the back of my head, sort of into my ear, my back of my head. And I was then suddenly completely awake. And as I was fully awake, I realized the hand I was holding with one of my hands actually was no longer a human hand. It morphed into these really horrible, long skeletal fingers. And I remember I moved my fingers down to the edges and I could feel these very pointy, hard finger bones at the end. And simultaneously, I realized it was real. And in my head, I kind of probably screamed out, did something, knowing it was real, knowing it was something was spooning me with this horrible voice and moaning, groaning in my head with this lady's name. And I then leapt out of bed, put my light on, and there was absolutely no person there. And there was no darkness, there was nothing there. But I could feel something really horrifically inhuman, evil. And afterwards, for a while, I wondered whether it was a residue of something. But now I'm wondering, actually, was the thing still there and watching me maybe for a minute? So once I leapt out of bed, put the light on, my whole body was still reverberating with this huge energy. And I could feel, and I think now it possibly was still there for a tiny bit. And it's really hard to explain, but it felt, as I said to you in my message, it felt completely godless. And I'd had dark experiences over the years in my other very old house. And I had some interactions with things which felt really quite nasty, but never godless. And as I said to you in my message, everything on earth seems to have an energy, this spiritual energy, from bugs to butterflies to flowers. You can sort of feel God in them.
Yeah.
Don't want to sound too up myself, but there's a spiritual, there's a something there. And this thing wasn't just godless, it felt like a black hole sucking in, I'm assuming, energy, goodness, whatever, and but pulsating out this horrible, thick sense of evil. It's really hard to explain, but that's all I can remember is it was godless and just terrifying. And there's that atavistic, subconscious, unconscious need just to get away. And as I said in my message to you, lots of people have said that they can sense something really, really evil, and there's part of them that doesn't even have to process it intellectually. They just think, go, 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 just run. And it was that feeling. And this energy, this thing, whatever, gave off just something terrifying and inhuman. And then it was, I'm assuming it was possibly still there for a tiny bit. I then ran out of the room. I went and got my Bible, I put the lights on the rest of the house, and I came back and it still felt very heavy in my room, but there was nothing there.
Just before we move on to the next part, do you mind me asking about your faith then and your current faith?
So well, yeah, I mean, I have a faith. I don't always go to church. I tend to go in the main Christian celebrations, but I do love church, and I have a very sort of personal faith. I pray a lot for comfort and for thanks. I was brought up in a Methodist church, which is a lovely, relaxing, very friendly church, very child friendly. And I just always had this from the very earliest age. I remember just having this love of the thoughts of God, Jesus, angels. So it's always been there. I can't ever remember it not being there. And yeah, your faith is tested, but it's never wavered. So
Yeah,
it is something that's a huge part of my life.
yeah. One of the big reasons why I ask is because you've mentioned about Reiki and working with energy and stuff. Obviously that with Christians, particularly Catholics, that's a pretty sensitive subject matter. Have you had any sort of issues with the church or any Christian friends who have told you not to look into, not to use Reiki too much? I don't know too much about it, but apparently, according to some Christians, it opens up other doors, if you know what I mean. So it's you are a vulnerable, like lying there, you are a vulnerable vessel to other energies trying to infiltrate. And at the time, you were a very vulnerable vessel. Your spirituality, your state of mind, your energy levels. For me, you were a perfect vessel to flick or to oppress. So, have you had any sort of backlashes when bringing up the likes of Reiki and other spirituality devices?
Well, I've only ever had 3 Reiki treatments, and they were quite a while before um, that experience.
Yeah,
And because I don't go to church regularly, I'm not part of a Christian community.
yeah,
But I have heard, and I do know people who've actually begun to do Reiki courses to be a practitioner, and they have said you can be opened up. But I don't think I can see why you're saying that. But I don't think at that point, because it had been so
such a long period of
far,
time.
yeah. But I can understand what you're saying. Um, and it's the experience I had, the sensations were definitely energetic,
Yeah,
but just on a much less kind of intensity. But it felt the same place, or rather, if you have a Reiki treatment
yeah.
and you get that energetic movement all the way through your body, it did have that similarity to it. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I'm not gonna talk about my own subjective experiences with God and higher intelligence, but I think every relationship with God is unique to you. You don't
Hmm.
need to be going to church every week to confirm that relationship. I think as long as you pray, people call it manifest, whatever you want to call it. Again, it's put the labels on things. I think for me anyway, especially over the last 4 or 5 years in particular, my love and faith in God has strengthened, but in my own way. I don't have to conform to any rules or any man-made religion. My relationship with God is very unique to me. It's just important to talk about because this will spark questions and conversations with the audience members. So I'm just it's good to sort of stop the
Hmm.
conversation and talk about these sort of topics. For me, there is no right and wrong answer, but all I would say to you now as an observer, objectively sort of listening and reading your story, is you were very, very vulnerable. And it shows you for a reason. To somebody who wasn't that self-aware, it would have just absolutely freaked them out, and
Absolutely.
they would have run out the house. But for you having that shrapnel already from your previous house that you lived in, you were toughened up at that stage. And I think again, I believe everyone's chosen for a reason. When you're working in the light, you are targeted very heavily. Father Martin was called like God's warrior by a member of the one of the contributors. So you're chosen for a reason because you have a certain set of skills and you have a certain skill that complements the work of God, etc. But I'm not going to get all heavenly and preachy right now. But I just want you to know that you're not alone. There's a lot of people who are working in the light and who are battling out every day. So it's nice to talk to other people and to share similar
Hmm.
experiences. But really, I believe that, yeah, I believe we are all chosen. Not many people wake up, not many people have that spiritual awakening, unfortunately. But it's up to us to not to preach, but to be examples and to leave golden nuggets. And for what I do, I'm a storyteller. That's my legacy, is I get to leave my stories out into the public domain for people to watch until the end of time, in a sense. So let's get us back to talking about what happened after the event.
So after that evening, I was pretty, I was very confused and really scared and terrified, trying to work out exactly what had happened. And I had spoke to a family member of mine, and I didn't go into every single detail, but pretty much went into most of it. And they said, "I'll give you some sage and you can burn it." But I didn't have a shell, so I couldn't burn it.
Yeah.
So I very stupidly, naively, I just left it by the side of my bed. But the question was always, who is this woman? And I said, I've never heard of this woman. I've never ever come across anyone with that name, even in work. I have no idea. And everyone was just kind of a bit probably thinking, well, she probably dreamt it really. So that was the first night. I didn't sleep that night at all. I was awake till probably 4 or 5 in the morning. Obviously, being into the paranormal, I knew about 3 o'clock, 3:30. So I was really I was determined to get through that without falling asleep. But I was exhausted. But I was so terrified. I had cross by my bed. I had a rosary, which had been blessed in a font in the Vatican. And I had a Bible and I had my tea light on. And I probably had about 1 hour's sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was opening again. And then obviously it was time for school, take my child to school. And I was still in kind of a bit of state of shock and really anxious about everything. And as I said in my message, that day, my heart I started to feel really quite off, as if I was heartbroken. Like my soul and my heart I'd never felt so low, and it was the worst I'd ever felt. And I couldn't help but think it has to be related to this thing. And that lasted probably 2 days. And it was just the sense of hopelessness. Never ever experienced it before. I'm always trying to be positive. I was completely drained and I felt just terrible. But as human beings, we try and process and try and work out what may have happened. And I started trying to rationalize it, thinking maybe I was asleep, maybe it was my meds. So by day 4, I kind of thought maybe it's not what I thought. It was just a really horrible, very realistic dream. And hopefully that's not going to happen again. And I kind of tried to rationalize it away. And but I still felt heartbroken, couldn't work that out. And again, I never slept, still couldn't sleep, had to have my tea lights on. And I had been out for coffee with my family member. We'd had a walk with the dog, and we came back to the cottage and we opened the door. So this is day 4. And my family member picked up letters, some of my mail, and she put them on the side, and then this big yellow, thick, creamy envelope, very official looking. She sort of turned it over, and then I just had this intake of breath, and then she said, kind of like, "What the hell," or something, or maybe she swore. And I said, "What?" And she handed me it, and there was this lady's name, which this thing had said over and over again. And that was the name on this envelope. And then it was at that point I realized, actually, there's just no way this can't have been true. Someone has lived at this address, and this thing is attached to this cottage, to this person, and it's happened and it's true. And that really, from that moment on, I knew that I'd had a really terrifying, true encounter with something really evil, potentially even inhuman. And that was very, very, very scary. And that really was the beginning for me of searching for answers.
Got me investigator head on here. You mentioned about
Yes.
migraine medication. Just what were you on at the time of the when you experienced the entity?
It was just a painkiller, but it was a very small amount,
Yeah.
Especially for migraine. But as I said, I'd taken it for probably 15 years
Yeah.
without any of that kind of experience.
Yeah. So I had to ask.
No,
I don't believe
absolutely.
it's anything to
Yeah,
do with the
no, no.
medication, but I have to be thorough in my questioning.
No, that's fine. I would have asked the same question.
Did you move out straight away with your daughter, or did you stay there for a few years?
Well, actually, because I was going through my divorce, I couldn't move out.
Yeah.
But because of the letter, and I sent you a photo of the second one I got,
Yeah.
because the other one I actually returned to sender.
Yeah.
And I should say, I almost felt that by then, I mean, it's a few years ago now, so I'm trying to think of the timeline. It's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, and over the years, thinking about things, reading, watching other people's experiences and paranormal shows, I've been trying to piece together the different potentials of what actually happened. So at the time, once I got that letter with this person's name on, I was pretty confident. I'm saying confident that she, at the time, I actually did think maybe it was attached to her, that it was a case of mistaken identity rather than
Yeah.
it had sought me out or had suddenly appeared. So that was my thoughts at the time. But I did check on 192.com, and yes, she had lived at my cottage. And it was then that I got in touch with my Reiki master friend, who was also a bit of a spiritualist. And I explained what had happened. And what she actually said was it was most likely this person had been in lots of debt. There was a trauma with that there wasn't actually an entity as such, but rather a negative energy force created by this letter from a debt agency.
Right.
And so this was her thoughts. And she said, just protect yourself. I can't feel anything. I can't feel anything negative. But actually, by the time I rang off, I just thought, well, you're wrong, because I was awake. At some point, I was experiencing reality. I wasn't unconscious. I was feeling this thing, the weight, the sound, the noise, the bones, and the energy afterwards. I wasn't sleepwalking. I wasn't lucid dreaming. And even under interrogation, I would say the same thing. I knew it happened, and it was real. So I couldn't really move anywhere. There was very few houses that I could afford. So I knew I just had to stay put. But from that moment on, I just, probably for the first year, I never slept properly at all, because I was just so terrified that it might come back. And I just felt that, well, I should say, once we found that the letter had arrived, that day I went round the cottage, kind of shouting out, I wasn't this person. They had no reason to be there. Didn't want to be there. I wanted them to leave me alone, that kind of thing. And strangely, it didn't come back. The thing didn't come back. So I'm assuming maybe it it was a case of mistaken identity, really.
Yeah, you
Um,
mentioned about the energy being like godless in the room. So looking back now on reflection, do you believe it to be purely demonic in what you encountered?
well, once I had that experience, I did start to look, and I hadn't really before. I did start to read about demonology. That's how I came across Father Malachi's book. Although I have to say I didn't finish it because I was really freaked, and I removed it from my Kindle because it was just
It's a
too
great
much.
it's a great book, but it's hard. It's hard to get through. Yeah,
Um,
resistance is there for a reason. You've got to hack through the resistance.
and remember, because I didn't understand what had possibly happened, I wasn't sure if it could happen again, and that was like my
Yeah,
a
you're putting
huge
boundaries in
fear of
place.
mine.
Yeah.
Yes, I just couldn't work out what had happened. But I started to read about it, and I have done really ever since. And I have taken a greater interest in religion and theology and the
Yeah.
church and Book of Enoch even, and what are demons, what are fallen angels, and this whole thing, which I have to say I still enjoy. But it is searching for answers, and possibly, obviously, there can only ever be supposition, and conjecture. There can't ever be. No one will truly know really what happened. But as I said, you piecing together all these jigsaw parts over the years, and watching more things, reading more things, I've kind of changed my views of maybe what happened. I was always particularly terrified of the idea that this thing had somehow taken my soul, my spiritual energy, my something out of my body. And I repeatedly watched programs with exorcists and priests and things saying you have to give yourself or allow them in, or there's an invitation, and I just couldn't get over that. I thought I didn't invite anything in, because at this point I did believe this potentially so dark that it was from something, a very, very dark place, if you want to call that a demon, but a very dark entity. And I thought I did not invite it in at all. And over time, and it's really only in the last couple of years, I started to remember the spiritual medium I spoke to many, many years ago. And she had said, you have the ability to heal. But she also mentioned, amongst a lot of other things, that I left my body at night and I flew around. Now, I wish I'd asked more questions, but when you're young, you don't realize the enormity of what's being said sometimes. And I didn't ask exactly what she meant. And I'd heard of astral projection and planing, but I didn't really know what it meant. And it's really just in the last couple of years that it kind of started to dawn on me. Maybe the thing didn't take me out of my body. Maybe I was already out of my body, astral projecting, or
It's for me, it sounds like it sees an opportunity. You talked about a spiritual reckoning before, about the highly charged energy through your body. It just sounds to me like, and this is my subjective opinion, but it sounds to me that it saw an opportunity and it struck. And we talk about demonic oppression a lot in this line of work, and how a demon, and especially a demonic entity in a house in particular, would just wear the person down, continue to wear them down, energy, spiritually, psychologically, until they do give themselves over. In a sense, it's called demonic oppression. It's not really sort of people go straight to the possession stage, which is very, very rare, as you know. It doesn't sound to me like this is a demonic oppression case, because you would have just been tortured by this thing. You do have skills and abilities that you weren't the weak vessel that it thought you were. I think it found out very quickly that
exposes.
Yes, I mean stubborn. To come back to the story, how has it affected you since the encounter?
Well, as I say, over the years, looking for answers, and I never found any stories out there which were similar. You think of like Doris Bither, and it's really scary, the entity. It's nothing like that, because hers was physical attacks. And then I haven't done too much investigation with astral projection, but that was quite terrifying for me, because I thought, if I have been outside of my body, could this happen again? Could it happen with something else?
Yeah.
And it's not something I could control. And to be honest, I don't want to have it at all. If that is what's happening, because it could happen again. And as I say, I can't control where I'm going or what I'm doing. So that's always been a fear, a worry. I've had lots of questions over the years, what would have happened had I been with this thing longer? Could there have been some kind of, and I don't want to sound was kind of melodramatic, but I almost felt it was such an overwhelming spiritual experience of was I going to be imbued with some kind of knowledge, transformational knowledge, or knowledge of something really profound. I almost felt I was building up to being shown almost like an enlightenment or something. And I wonder what would have happened had that kind of reached its ending. Would there have been some kind of a knowledge, a profound knowledge of something? Sounds a bit strange, sounds maybe a bit sociopathic, but I felt I was about to be shown something beyond anything.
Yeah.
Sort of, it sounds a bit strange, but there was something like, as I can say, like a rapture and enlightenment, something. And then obviously the worst case scenario was that what would have happened could I've had an attachment, an ongoing connection with this thing, even though I feel now I was at the wrong place at the wrong time, and I was kind of accosted, hijacked by mistaken identity, really. But would there have been a connection with it?
So yeah, I'm going to butt in there. I don't believe it was wrong place, wrong person, wrong
No.
time. I think you were exactly the right person at that right time. I don't believe in coincidences. Can I get you reading something? I'm giving the teacher homework here.
Yes, I have.
There's a book called The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell. He talks about the different stages of the hero's journey, and I use it in my script work, and I'm writing stories and stuff, fictional stories. There's actually the section of the arc, basically, which is called the refusal of the call. So it's basically the hero's reluctance to basically take on the call to adventure, as we say, and you very much sound like you're at that stage, that crossroads stage, where you don't want to take this on because you don't know what is down the road. And I would say to you from experience, having been on the hero's journey, it's one of the most difficult steps you'll ever take in your life. But just to go back at the beginning of the conversation where we talked about before the why, it's the who. And I believe that until you really start investigating yourself and to push yourself out into uncharted territory and really get to know who you are and what your sense of purpose is in this life, I think the why is simple after that. Did I really want to get into demonology when I took on the Hostage to the Devil documentary? No. I literally, from a selfish point of view, someone was offering me a feature-length film to do, and I was like, yes, I'll do it. And then I just became involved in this line of work. Yeah, so there are no mistaken identities. There are no wrong place, wrong time, wrong person. I believe God has a way of putting you in the path, and it's up to you to say yes or no, and to take that step in this line of work it's so tough because everything is and everybody is telling you not to do it, but only you can make that decision.
And that's I mean, you're absolutely right. In the subject for me has always been really fascinating, and as I said to you in my message, I've got so many interests that now have kind of aligned like the planets. I can see my love of history, my love of religion, my love of psychology, my love of the paranormal, parapsychology. The whole thing is kind of aligned, and that kind of realization happened really in the last 2 years. I started to think, because I read a lot about sort of Knights Templar and Ark of the Covenant. I love the Tune Shrine. So anything like that I find extremely interesting. But then I also worry when you watch lots of sort of podcasts where priests, exorcists will say, don't take too much interest because things are aware that you're taking too much interest. And then I think, have I taken too much interest in these subjects? Because can you take too much interest? I don't want anything to take notice again that I'm interested. It's how do you know when you've gone too far? Because my recordings on my television are just really shows, just the really channel just got lots and lots of most haunted and exorcist stories, and it's but as I say, it is a huge interest of mine. And then, of course,
Yeah.
looking for answers. And I think
Yeah.
as you get older as well, you lose people, people die, people go through terrible things. And I think even that kind of pushes some people on to search for answers, even when they might not have had maybe a paranormal experience. And I think you get to a certain point in life, you are starting to think what's out there.
Yeah.
Even if you haven't had terrifying encounters with horrible things.
The tagline I was given when making the documentary was, "You can't look at the devil and not expect him to look back." You know, it's that how
Yeah.
you're talking about, like how much do you go into the research and how much do you shine a light in that darkness? But unfortunately, for this in this line of work, you're either all in or you're not. And
Yeah.
the people that find themselves in a lot of problems, demonologists, investigators, even priests, are the ones who aren't going into it 100%. They're going into it half-heartedly or with too much fear in their hearts. You have to have full trust in what you're doing, full faith in God, and know that you are meant to be doing this line of work. Your sense of purpose.
Yeah.
There's nothing else I want to do in this life other than tell stories, and that's my
Mm-hmm.
sense of purpose. And I know that now. It's only found reinforced 4 years ago for me, but there's nothing else I would rather do, and that is my sense of purpose. Not preach, but leave breadcrumbs out. That's the
Mm-hmm.
one big thing, revelation that came through for me as well is don't chase an audience. Your audience will find you. And unfortunately, with content creators like myself, we're all obsessed with followers, audience, and then it really taught me that just surrender to that process and trust the universe and trust God, and really it's about, the audience will find you eventually. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that don't really get to know what their sense of purpose is, and they're just lost souls basically.
I believe that. But what I really like about your channel and your work, it comes across as very authentic.
Yeah.
And I think over the years, like now, you've got to be very careful what you watch because there's so much rubbish out there for
Yeah.
paranormal shows, a lot of misinformation. I mean, even just looking at sort of personally from astral projection, and as I say, I haven't gone massively into it because I was a bit fearful. If I can't control it, why should I start researching about it? But there's
Yeah.
so much out there where you've got YouTubers saying it's perfectly safe, you can do this, don't worry. And to
Yeah.
me, make an informed choice, but at least tell people there's potentially a risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
when I started just briefly what I'd watched and read, um, there there's potentially lots of issues and risks. And I just think if people are going to try and do it, and it's
Yeah.
everywhere now, TikTok everywhere, at least know that potentially there are dark forces out there, dark energies,
Well, yeah, yeah,
um,
absolutely.
and you should know the risks.
Yeah, well, and people don't trust the gut enough as well. I mean, my gut saved my life numerous times in the military. The gut is strong, and you need to people just don't just forget the power of the gut and the gut feeling that something's not right. Yeah, trust it. Always trust it, 100% of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that sort of fascinated me really with Father Malachi, when I'd heard him talk a few times, he said be really very careful, and that to be fearful of, I believe he said be fearful of when he would go in to sort of do an exorcism or whatever, he had that sense of enormity of what he was coming up against. And again, I think
Having respect for the adversary, but also not letting fear manipulate and take
yes,
over, his line of
absolutely.
work. That, I mean, exorcists just, oh, they're a certain type of person, human spirit, whatever you want to call them. They've been chosen for reasons that only God knows. But honestly, go away and read The Hero's Journey,
I
Joseph
will,
Campbell.
absolutely. Yeah,
You'll
thank
be
you.
fascinated by it. Yeah, and people always talk about, especially in this line of work, people always talk about that case that got them into this line of work. And it sounds like you've
Yes.
been given an opportunity, and the spark has been created from your encounter in that house. So I always like to turn a negative into a positive. So I believe that this could be the event that gets you into this line of work properly and more officially.
Can I just say, Marty, I would be very interested if anyone else has had something similar. I did
Absolutely, yeah.
watch a couple of YouTube videos about hauntings, and people had said they'd sort of astral projected and then had horrible interactions with spirits. But I just wondered how many people had actually had that encounter, and it's just not talked about because obviously you come across as, have you got a mental health issue, or was it just sleep paralysis or lucid dreaming? But I would be very interested if anyone else had something similar.
No, obviously they can comment on the YouTube link or wherever they're listening to the podcast. They can comment and we can get in touch with them. And did you ever feel the need to find this net? No. See, the resistance is there.
Yeah. I do have to still pass the cottage. It's on one of the main routes, and
Okay.
I don't ever park outside it. I would rather walk, from into the shopping area. I'd rather have a 10-minute walk than even park outside if there were no parking spaces. I never look in the windows. It has got someone in there, and I have a feeling it might be a woman, just judging by what's
Right,
in
interesting.
the
Yeah,
front
it'd be
windows and
interesting
things.
it'd be interesting what type of woman it's attracted this time. Or probably someone
Exactly.
similar.
But I've always I looked at 192 and then that was it. I didn't want to do any more because I just felt, firstly, I felt in the very beginning that maybe she'd conjured up something, Ouija boards,
Yeah.
dark arts, rituals, whatever.
Yeah.
So I really felt maybe I just didn't want that connection. And then even if she had the attachment again, I didn't want to reawaken anything that was going to potentially bring it back into my life. So I have no idea. I've never looked on Facebook. Don't want to. Don't wish to. Because that fear is still there. I think you said very early on, how's it affected you? I have religious stuff by my bed. I always say prayer. And if I'm alone in the house overnight, I have to have my tea lights on.
Yeah.
I've never, and even then I don't sleep very well. And this is in my new house. So
yeah,
the idea is always there, even 6 years on. It's
left like a residue in a sense.
There. Absolutely.
And
yes.
well, let's not rule out closing this chapter for you. I'm not going to force you to go and investigate it, but let's not just put a full stop at the end. I mean, it maybe down the line you may want to sort of close that chapter, but maybe just leave it open for now. I don't know, but only and the fact that you haven't been oppressed by the same entity in this new place suggests that maybe it does need to be left closed in a sense.
Yes, well, I've never had any other experiences since moving into this house, and actually, strangely, this is the first house I've ever lived in, where I've thought the first day when I moved in, I just thought, oh my God, it's got absolutely no energy whatsoever. Yeah. And I realized in all the houses I ever lived in, there'd always been something, but this house
been charged. Yeah,
there's always been something. Yeah, and this is completely void of anything. And I've always been very pleased. Yeah, and there's we're not too far from churchyard, so that's quite interesting. But yeah, I just don't want to open any old connections. But as I say, it's affected me because I'm the sort of person that needs answers, and I like to research, and I like to come to some kind of informed conclusions. And possibly, I will never ever do. I could have theological, parapsychologists, yogis, spiritual mediums. We could all have maybe an input, but at the end of the day, who knows ultimately why?
No, just to close on that is, going back to it's the who before the why. So I mean, like I said before, as long as you keep working on yourself and getting to know yourself more and what these abilities are, and to fine tune what they are. And I truly believe that once you start turning the mirror on yourself more and working on yourself, then the why will be pretty straightforward and around the corner, really.
I mean, it's something I'm very interested in, sort of that spiritual work and healer work.
Yeah.
But again, there's so many people out there where you just think, it just feels like so many charlatans charging
Well, yeah,
huge amounts of
everything.
money, and
Yeah, I mean, everything gets corrupt by money. If you look at
yes,
man-made religion, look at the Catholic Church, look at the Protestant Church, look at Judaism. Just look at everything. Everything gets corrupted by money eventually.
yes,
And even with the
absolutely.
spirituality, with the shaman work, the plant medicine work. So there's a few shamans that I've met and I've talked to and been in the presence of, and there's been certain ones that you just know that they're not doing the work, they're not doing the inner work.
Yes.
Good things always get corrupted. I'm not sort of tarnishing everyone with the same brush there, but as long as you keep working on yourself and are self-aware with that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's close there. I really appreciate you coming on and
No,
talking to us
thank
about your
you.
story. Like you said before, if anyone's got a similar story, then please put it in the comments below. And talking's so important. You're not going mad. You're not on your own. There's a lot of people out there who have had similar experiences, and it's just nice to hear other people and to collectively come together and share experiences.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time, and keep up the good work.
No worries. Thanks. I say to myself, all I want to do sometimes is just go and chop wood in the woods and just be left alone. But that's too easy, and that's not what I'm here to do. So unfortunately, I have to sort of put the armor on and get out there and fight it out. Really appreciate you coming on to the podcast, and keep updating me with anything that comes your way, and I'll help as much as I can.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you, Marty. Thank
All
you.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening, and remember, we have a Facebook page too, so please give us a like and buy us a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com to help us keep this podcast going. And it would only be right to finish with the main man himself.
There's no doubt about it that where materialism reigns and where idealism or the life of the spirit is crushed, there's no doubt about it that Satanism and Satanist rituals flourish. It's a known fact. Simply as night follows day, or as night follows day is the best image. Whenever there's a loss of spirit, a loss of religion, a loss of morals and ethics, there always is an accompanying Satanist reaction. Always. In this world of man, this cosmos, there are just two main forces: God and evil, personified in Satan and Lucifer. And finally, since everything is being globalized today, evil itself is globalized. And what before was practiced by small communities and small sections of communities, small little groups, covens as we used to call them, is now becoming the way of life and the way of thought of whole populations, according as their morals and ethics are completely degraded and reduced to materialistic terms and hedonistic aims and totally this world view of things. And that is the reign of evil, and it is directly in contravention to the reign willed by God, who is the sovereign creator and master of all things. So that's the situation today. The evil is, no doubt about it, more organized, more globalized, and it comes out in the new age, which is the deification of man and the creation of man's habitat as the only aim worth having, whereas this is not God's aim in this life for human beings.